Good evening everyone. مساء الخير جميعا. أنا اسمي ناصر أبو الحسن من AGI Architects. We're going to speak in English.
Well, thank you everyone for this invitation. And tonight we are just tonight we are going to talk about what we call the post-COVID living, no, in a way that what we wanted to mention is, let me see if I managed to control this. Okay, now. So sorry about the inconvenience of the internet. What I was just mentioning, today we wanted to talk about the post-COVID living in a way that is not only presenting our work, but our thinking behind our work, which in many cases is more relevant than our work itself. The issue of post-COVID is not something new in a way that all the dynamics that we have seen during COVID, they were already present there. And the only thing that COVID has done is accelerate all these dynamics. And this is why when we talk about post-COVID, we talk about something that already existed, but has brought some change in the way that we will confront in the future the way that we live. So the first thing that we are going to talk about, and you will see it later, is we have structured our presentation in 4 chapters. Now, one about the future living, that is, again, we will be addressing what are the main concepts of our thinking, and then how we have implemented at different scales, because that also is quite relevant. We will go through some of our work, but in a very fast way, mainly in images. But in each of them, we will tell you what we think or what has been the base of our work. The first thing that we wanted to mention is the responsibility as an architect or designers, no, in the built environment. And it is something that we have been always aware, but right now, through the pandemic situation, it has been even more relevant. And this is why when we talk about pandemic or the future after pandemic, it's how relevant it is for an architect now to approach certain issues that it not only talk about healthy issues, but in the way we live, in the way a society develops itself. When we talk about future living, and this is one, okay, we'll see it later on, we have seen, and this is something that we always address it before, how sustainable is our work? Now, we always think how sustainable is our work in a way that when we build anything, it's not something for one generation. In many cases, this is going to have an imprint in the society that is going to last many generations. So don't think that our building or our design or our thinking is going to only last for certain years. In many cases, and that has been the mistake for many societies, that the designer is not only thinking in a long term, it's always thinking in a short term. That this is a responsibility also for all the stakeholders that are involved in any process. In that way, adaptability is something that is a must. It's a must, and especially now in the future, there's going to be a scarcity of resources, and we have to be conscious of the environment in a way that we haven't been before. As I mentioned before, okay, we're going to address this in 3 scales: and the urban scale, the organism, so in a medium scale and a small scale. That is what we call the cell. When we talk about urban scale, we talk about a district, we could talk about a super block, we could talk about even a city. What we call an organism is mainly one unit. It could be a full development, no? But it's something that is still self-sufficient. And then we go to the level of the self, that is the living space of any inhabitant that we will know that we are addressing, that we are just thinking or designing for. What is important for us is for sure, then, and you will see it later on in a mind map that, okay, that we have done, and we normally do it in all our projects. There are certain parameters, certain issues that has to be, we consider that has to be addressed constantly, which is sustainability, and that these are the parameters that we have seen in many cases has been neglected, but right now it's something that, although we were addressing in certain cases, we see that it's extremely even more relevant to address it now. So adaptability, transformability. Why we are saying that? Because we cannot destroy cities to rebuild new cities. We will need to work with the urban fabric, the existing urban fabric, and transform them in a positive or in a healthy unit, okay? And to provide these other parameters that we like to talk about always, in a healthy living, linked with an identity. An identity, when we talk about the identity, that is really a topic that, especially in the Middle East, a lot of people likes to talk about it. It's already, I mean, involves so many things, from the society to the culture to politics to economics. So it's a kind of, it englobes so many parameters that builds a society. And this is why also it's crucial in a way we approach things, because it's not the same working in Europe than in the States, than in the Middle East. So again, when we talk about, we always confront any project, we are talking about this type of topics: collaboration, resilience, business plan, even a business plan, because unless this is the projects that we do, their resilience in time, is going to be very difficult to make it successful. And business plan, we are not always only talking about a business plan for the developer, means all over, that has to be successful for the whole society at all levels. One of the things that, let's jump now a bit more into our work, and this is the Opportunity Pavilion, a project that we just finished, but it addresses one of the things that for us, we have seen that has been one of the main issues that also the pandemic has brought, is the importance of the public realm, how needed is this contact between different human beings, and how these options, how the pedestrians move, around the city. In many cases, and this is something that is a bit of a pity in many places in the Middle East, especially in the Middle East, also in other cases, a foreign model was implemented, neglecting so many things, that created this identity of this society. And everything in many cases was kind of, how could I say it, was represented in the public realm. So this is why the public realm for us has been very critical, and working in the public realm is still very critical. We show you right now the Opportunity Pavilion of Expo 2020, that is a building, but it's a building that turns around this plaza, okay? It really connects the whole district, the Opportunity District, with our building. It's not about a building itself, an object itself, is about a space of engagement. Sorry about the pictures. These pictures are not the best. We are just shooting as we speak, but for us, the core of this building, of this project, it was that, how to create a space for the engagement. This is linked to the exhibition topic, that it was something given by Expo 2020. Take into account, this is one of the three thematic pavilions of the Expo. It talks about opportunity. That means the relation between human beings and how the impact, the action of one person could have a huge impact. So this is why we said, okay, let's create a building that is not a building. Let's create a public space in which that engagement could happen. And this is something that, okay, I'll show you very briefly. It is represented by what we call the Earth, two different spaces. One that is where the building itself, that is this kind of earthy building that extends all over and extends to the outside, creating a kind of a carpet that, again, goes back to this idea of engagement, social engagement. And then this huge canopy, that you have seen it before, okay, this huge canopy, that for us represents also the dreams of the human being. It's all links to this idea of protection, of how to, we create a space that is healthy, to stay. It's a pleasant space, and it's in constant transformation, and it's a space where we propose people to, again, to interact. This is people might say, okay, yes, very good, because you are creating a kind of a square, an approach that could be only implemented in very few buildings. No, we have done it, for instance, in a hospital. Here we take it to a courthouse. It's what we call it a city of justice. This is a project competition that we won at the end of last year. Unfortunately, it hasn't gone through, but it was a very interesting competition that we did. And in the same way, everything turned around a public space. A public space that was an enclosed public space from which we connected the different units. There were offices and courthouses, but again, everything revolved about around the public realm, which for us is the core in many of our projects. Again, why are we saying that? Because that goes back to this idea of how to build a stronger society, how to build a society in which we could share things, we could collaborate more. That will make it more feasible financially, but also from the cultural point of view, it will enrich the society and will enrich the whole space. This is another project. It's a waterfront development that we did also last year, a bit before the pandemic. And again, the same topics comes back, okay, one after the other one, and everything turns around this way of engagement. I'll go fast. Then you will hear in many cases, what about the smart cities? We don't think about smart cities. We think about how to build smart, how to build smart, meaning, and that refers also to what is in many cases, the heritage that we have received, and unfortunately we have neglected in many cases, how to interconnect the different services. This is another project also for Kuwait, another part of Kuwait, another waterfront development, always with this idea of how to create a space that is more collaborative. If we do a tower, why it should be built in glass? Things like that. So this is something that is extremely relevant for us, and everything turns around. But as I was mentioning before, the pandemic, what has done is accelerate all these dynamics, but the dynamics were existed. And what it's pushing right now is to be more conscious of the main problems that each of the society and each city has. I will pass, I will let Naaser complete the presentation right now. Thank you very much to everyone. We will later on be open to questions in any case.
Thank you, Joaquin. I hope everyone is seeing my screen. We'll start with the second chapter, which is the organism. As you know, within any structure, the future of specifically the home should be actually about flexible spaces. These are the ideas of flexible spaces are spaces that are ready to be adaptable to the individual as well as the collectible needs, sensibilities, and the conditions around. So we do not talk about proposals specifically in this presentation, but we talk about ideas that are able to be put together, changed, and adaptable depending on how we deal with the project itself. So we will be responding to what we call systems, and these are the systems that begin to be implemented depending on the concepts or technologies that are very much transformative and is constantly changing as the way we live in organisms change. So we'll start with one of our projects that we recently finished, which again, we will not refer to the project as much, but we will be actually referring to certain goals within it, which the word sustainability, as we all know, it's a word that is quite important and extremely important from the environmental point of view, but for us, it's actually much more important from actually the social point of view, as well as the engagement that it could create between the human beings. So when we begin to develop our project, we all know that from an environmental point of view, by 2030, all new buildings should operate at net zero. This should be taken into not as a privilege, but should be taken into as a fact. And a fact for us to be able to live after 2030 comfortably as human beings, we have to begin to achieve that. And we cannot achieve that only on a building level, but we have to look at it much more holistically. And that has to happen on a master plan level, obviously on systems, so ideas within the building that are much more passive, from a natural cooling, solar shading, building orientation, ventilation, and insulation, facade glazing, energy production, all of the main aspects that we know very much about within architecture and we are able to control. But more importantly, what we are should have part of the project, as an inherent part of the project, are certain elements which are, we talk about them, but we actually should begin to implement much closely. Nature. Obviously, as we begin to develop projects, we should look at nature as a driver of the design. And when it's driver of the design, it has to actually be integrated as the main element of the design itself. So we have to recreate the idea of nature within our built environment. Obviously, circulation is another element that we always talk about. It's a place where we ensure that people cross, are able to actually socialize, are able to connect, and obviously there are places of creating opportunities between people in the pedestrian world. The other elements, as we call further, it's actually the flexible configuration. So within the design, obviously we start to look at flexibility, but also we start to look at orientation. So how do we begin to orient the project? How do we begin to look at views, look at this sunshade, look at the positioning, but much more importantly, try to orient them to increase in environment similar to ours, privacy, and to create as much as comfort for the users and as much views to the outside. Another topic which we also discussed, which is flexibility. Obviously, the idea of flexibility is inherent in all the designs, but it's very important that we have to begin to emphasize that the adaptability within a flexible world will allow us to change and will allow us to be able to ensure that in situations that we're living in, we're able to use the change to our advantage to improve on to improve the living environment. Self-sufficiency. This is also a topic that we continuously talk about, especially in larger developments, but most importantly is how do we begin to integrate between all the components of a larger project or a larger city that we begin to depend on each other from a programmatic point of view. So that's something that we cannot only look at as a program, but also looks as a form of revenue or even a form of enhancing the comfort of the users of the project or the development. Shopping continues to always be as a mean to bring people together, but also as a mean to ensure that there is life that could happen throughout the whole day. So the ideas of actually ensuring that the neighborhoods depend on each other, small businesses, larger businesses, workspaces, green spaces, all of these have to come together and constantly be able to live off each other. General facilities. This is something that in every development, we have to ensure that these common spaces and multiple types of common spaces begin to help users to use them and to change and to allow them to change. Again, this begins to define what we are calling the shared spaces. The shared spaces in a built environment historically was the driver for people to come together. And I think this is something that we constantly, as we begin to develop, we should begin to look into those and bring them back into the cities and bring them back into the public realm and ensure that we can constantly work on shared spaces. Obviously, in homes, in larger developments, and also on the city level. Where are the opportunities in shared spaces? These are the places where we could play, where we could begin to work, where we begin to garden, where we begin to meet together. And in the advantage of the larger developments as we see them right now, we don't constantly need to see it on the horizontal scale, but we could actually begin to see it vertically. So the higher you go in terms of height of the buildings, you are able to create them as multiple levels and with different types of privacies and different types of programs. And how these shared spaces begin to help us to try to come together. Obviously, in this example, which is a school that we're developing right now, where we look at the common spaces as the educational spaces, and the classrooms just become supporting spaces to the common spaces, which are the heart of the education environment itself. And this is based on studies that constantly we explore and research that students learn more outside the classroom than they learn in the classroom, which is the best reference of how these common shared spaces are. Obviously, what's the advantage of those spaces? Those spaces that we mentioned earlier, whether it's on a city level or even on a building level, or even in a personal level, which are within a home, they're all places where it could be transformed. And transformed, like we also in the past nearly a year and a half, if not a bit more, that we all had to adapt or transform our homes, or transform our backyards, or even transform our neighborhoods to be able to adapt to change. And the primary change that we all went to, which is the pandemic, forced us to change our habits. And we believe that this is, from now on, is something that has to be inherent in every project, which is the idea of transformability. Obviously, this is an example of a project that we've worked on and will continue to work on, where you could begin to see that the outdoor spaces on regular places in a multifamily residential compound acts as the main circulation where the neighbors come together. But in the case of a pandemic, immediately there's some transformation within the walls that allows this outdoor space to become these filters to ensure that the families who live within the dwellings are being able to be protected and so on. So when we move back to the fourth chapter, which is the cell, obviously the scale is much smaller, but within the same overall plans. So within the cell, we try to ensure the highest level of comfort within the minimal impact to the environment. And that's something that is very important to us. So as we begin to develop these projects, we have to begin to ensure that we are responsible on the cell level, which is the smallest level, that we respond to three main drivers: the climate, the landscape, and the environment. Obviously, with passive strategies that we continuously experiment, that we are able to address these three elements in quite a natural way, or from a humanistic point of view, it's actually second nature to us as humans. So as we begin to develop passively, we're able actually to not only look towards the views, but also begin to adapt to the wind, begin to adapt to the sun, and begin to actually adapt to the colder breeze, and begin to ensure that we as humans are able to create our own sustainable environment in the most efficient way possible. Obviously, ideas related to passive strategies are something that has been inherent in a climate similar to ours here in the Middle East, and primarily in the Gulf region. And we continue to push forward to ensure that we implement them all over. Obviously, as we go forward, as we go further in this, again, we go back to the flexibility within the unit and how we begin to, within the cell, and how we begin to change the spaces and adapt them to the needs, whether vertically or horizontally. We do the transformations as the families get bigger or they get smaller, how the changes have to begin to switch, or in the case of pandemics, where we are forced to change usage within these spaces. And on a public level, which for us is quite important, how do we begin to ensure that the public scale, which is the larger level, begins to adapt to our traditions? And we believe this is a project that will be soon launched in Expo 2020, which is one of our latest projects, which is called the Majlis project. It's a reinterpretation of the living room, which is the private living room, but into our on a much larger urban scale. So we have taken the idea of the traditional gathering space within this part of the world and readapt it on a much larger scale, where we wanted to bring people to talk, to be able to connect, and more so to be able to be represented with the ideas of the culture that we were working in, and much more importantly, ideas of what we believe as humans, which is how do we begin to connect people together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. and Engineer Jacqueline, on this very insightful lecture. We're going to move on to the Q&A session, but we're going to give the audience a couple of seconds for the questions to come in. Thank you.
I think there's already one question.
Yes, we can take that one.
Yeah.
The public realm in traditional societies had a much deeper sense than the one that exists in today's society in relation to how people's roles at that time and their rights in the public sphere. How did the public deal with the public spaces that you have designed, and did the space achieve the goals as the definition of a public realm?
I think, this is a very good question, no? And I think it really addresses or tackles one of the main issues we are confronting. When we were just mentioning before that a new way of thinking was implemented. Let's talk about the Middle East, but we could talk about in many areas also, or outskirts, for instance, of many cities in Europe. So a model that it was implemented after the Second World War until today, and it's really on fashion, this sprawl system, it cannot destroy the public realm. And the problem is that void, you have to rebuild it. And this is what we try to do at the scale that we have. It's true in some cases, there are some clients that they are ready to listen to us, other ones less comfortable with these ideas. But it's true that if we manage, even as an architects, we manage to provide something, even if it's a small platform, like what we have seen with the Metzlis, and this is a very good exercise in a huge urban space, how we create a small cell, in which we create a small platform for rebuild all what this the person that raised that question. We are always very happy. We know that the complexity of the public realm is much more higher than in many cases we could provide. Why? Because it has been built over centuries. So it's something that the public realm, you don't build it in one day, but we try to provide a platform for people to start building, recovering, retaking this public realm. And what we were saying before, we consider rebuilding our society in many ways, not rebuilding because it doesn't exist, but in a way that is providing higher values than what a regular space could provide. I don't know, Nassir, if you want to extend. In some cases, we have been more successful than other ones. For instance, the project of Wafra Living in Kuwait, has been very successful, and we could say we haven't provided a huge, it hasn't been a huge effort. It hasn't been, we have provided just a small platform at different levels of connectivity for the residents to interact, and has been extremely successful. But if the people don't have that space to interact, then us as an architects, I think we have to provide it. In what way? We have to find excuses to do it in all of our projects, because this is what will enrich not only the culture, the society, the economy itself, but many other topics, many other aspects of what that complexity that this person is referring to. I don't know, Nassir, if you want to extend a bit more, or?
No, I think when it comes to human engagement, respectful of where we're coming from and the society we're living in, humans are naturally drawn to each other. And we as urbanists, architects, unfortunately, we decided at one point to actually detach human from each other. And we're detaching them, whether it was a conscious or an unconscious decision. This happened after the Second World War. And people are drawn to be closer. People are drawn to be actually much more interactive. And I think we have the mandate to create the comfort spaces, create the environment to allow the people to come together, and they will naturally be drawn. Yes, there are sensibilities between different cultures. There are the sensibilities that we architects have to begin to address, and this is something that is natural from the scale, from the wind, from the sun, and all of these things are yes, they are basics. We get to forget them when we begin to design cities, and more so when we put together large buildings and urban fabrics. But if we begin to look at the human scale, that will begin to change how we begin to address architecture and as well as urbanism.
We're going to take the last question. How was the impact of hot climate in Kuwait on the design of outdoor spaces?
Okay, I'll start with actually this the answer, and Joaquin, I'm sure, will be able to complement it. From our point of view, the passive strategies that has been inherent in this part of the world and other parts of the world, but specifically this part of the world, are extremely effective even today. Obviously, we as human beings, because we look at things in a very relative point of view, we constantly are looking for a much cooler environment, especially when we're living in desert environment. But what we have realized, and our practice have proved to us, it's that it is literally all very relative. And when we use techniques to passive strategies, which are through evaporative cooling, through actually funneling the wind, through creating shade, to actually ensuring that the environment around us, obviously, as most of you know, Kuwait is extremely dry in comparison to the UAE. So the minute you introduce some evaporative cooling, naturally the environment will actually feel much more comfortable. So we constantly look for these opportunities from a design point of view. So the origins of our design is responsive to these passive strategies, and they're not there. We don't actually add these strategies as add-ons or actually as systems. We start with them, and we leave the people to enjoy the outdoor spaces by actually enjoying these strategies. I don't know, Joaquin, if you want to add anything.
No, I mean, you have said so. I think that there are many examples. Just to make it short, for instance, the other day with the opening of the Expo 2020, extremely high temperature, high humidity. Okay, we went into our pavilion within the plaza of the pavilion. I'm not saying it was cold or something like that, but compare to the avenues, compared to the concourses, it was completely a different perception, is what Nasa is saying. We created a draft of wind, no, that it was constantly flowing. So that makes that the person, the people, no, that were there, make it like something that for sure is not an air conditioning space, but make it kind of a pleasant space, a pleasant to be, you know, and a space to be. So with these small things, I think we could achieve really high goals.
Naathar, Architect Hakwin, we'd like to thank you for your participation with us today, and we are looking forward to further participations with you guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure, and we enjoyed this presentation, and I hope you did for the past week worth of presentation.
Indeed, it was pleasant. Thank you.
Thank you.